They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I entirely disagree. Revenge is best served with a brilliant smile, a crystal champagne flute in hand, watching the person who completely destroyed you slowly dismantle their own life. My stepmother thought she buried me. She didn't know I had already read the final chapter. I gasped for air, bolting upright, as my hands clawed at the heavy, down-filled duvet. My chest heaved, my lungs greedily pulling in oxygen that didn't taste like sterile iodine and decay. There was no steady beep of a heart monitor, no suffocating scent of the hospice ward, and no crippling, agonizing pain radiating from my failing organs. Instead, I smelled lavender and expensive floor wax. I looked around frantically, my vision adjusting to the soft golden morning light filtering through custom silk drapes. I was in my childhood bedroom at the Kensington estate in Connecticut, the vintage mahogany vanity, the walls painted in a soft French blue. The oversized bay window, overlooking the manicured rose gardens, it was all exactly as it had been before the nightmare began. Trembling, I reached for the smartphone resting on my nightstand. The screen lit up, flashing the date, October 12th, 2021. I dropped the phone as if it had burned me, burying my face in my trembling hands. I was 23 again. I was alive. I had died a wretched, lonely death at 26, disowned by my father, completely bankrupt and universally despised by everyone in New York's elite social circles. And now, by some impossible miracle, I was back. In my previous life, I had been an absolute fool. When my mother passed away, my father, Robert Kensington, wasted no time marrying his grief counselor, Cassandra. She brought along her daughter Bianca, who was exactly my age. From the moment they stepped into the estate, Cassandra began a masterclass in psychological warfare. To my father and the outside world, she was the epitome of a gracious, loving stepmother, trying to blend a fractured family. In private, she isolated me, gaslit me, and orchestrated an elaborate series of events that painted me as an unstable, jealous, and eventually criminal problem child. I had played right into her hands. Every time she provoked me, I reacted with explosive anger. I threw tantrums, I yelled, I pointed fingers, and every time I did, Cassandra would simply look at my father with tear-filled eyes and whisper, "Robert, I'm trying so hard, but Rachel just hates me." By the time I realized what she was doing, it was far too late. She had convinced my father to transfer my inheritance to a trust she controlled, framed me for embezzlement from his company, and pushed me out onto the street. Even my fiancé Tristan had been in on it, carrying on a torrid affair with Bianca right under my nose. They had literally laughed at my hospital bedside as I succumbed to an illness I couldn't afford to treat. A soft, rhythmic knock on my bedroom door snapped me back to the present. "Rachel, darling, are you awake?" The sugary sweet voice sent a violent shudder down my spine. It was Cassandra. I took a deep, steadying breath. The old Rachel would have groaned, told her to go away, and started the day with immediate hostility. The new Rachel knew better. You don't fight a monster by screaming at it. You fight a monster by handing it a shovel and smiling while it digs its own grave. "Come in, Cassandra," I called out, forcing my voice into a light, cheerful register. The door eased open, and Cassandra stepped inside, carrying a silver tray with a porcelain cup of herbal tea. She was a strikingly beautiful woman in her late 40s, impeccably dressed, even at 7 in the morning, in a cashmere wrap and tailored slacks. Her warm, maternal smile reached her eyes, a practiced expression that had fooled billionaires and philanthropists alike. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said, setting the tray on my bedside table. "I thought you might need some chamomile. I know you've been so stressed about the St. Jude's Autumn Gala tomorrow night. It's your first time co-hosting with me, and I want you to feel completely supported. Ah, yes, the St. Jude's Autumn Gala, the exact night my life had begun to permanently unravel. In my past life, Cassandra had given me a custom-made dress for this event, claiming she had commissioned a top designer. It turned out to be a cheap, poorly constructed imitation. When a prominent fashion editor at the gala pointed it out, mocking me mercilessly, I had completely lost my temper. I had screamed at Cassandra in the middle of the ballroom, accusing her of humiliating me. Cassandra had simply wept, claiming she had been scammed by a tailor and was only trying to do something nice. I looked like an unhinged, spoiled brat berating a crying mother in front of 500 elite guests. "Thank you, Cassandra," I said, reaching out to take the teacup. My hand was perfectly steady. I offered her a soft, appreciative smile. "That's incredibly thoughtful of you. I really want tomorrow to go perfectly for both of us." Cassandra's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. A flicker of confusion crossed her perfectly Botoxed brow. She had been expecting resistance. She thrived on my resistance. "Well," she recovered smoothly, smoothing down my duvet. "I actually have a surprise for you. I had a dress specially made for you for tomorrow night. I'll have the maid bring it up later. I just know you're going to look radiant. I can't wait to see it," I replied, taking a delicate sip of the tea. "I know I can always trust your taste." She stared at me for a moment longer, clearly unsettled by my docility, before giving a tight nod and leaving the room. As soon as the door clicked shut, I set the tea down and walked over to my full-length mirror. Staring back at me was a girl with pale skin, tired eyes, and a devastatingly naive face. I placed a hand against the cold glass. No more screaming, I promised myself. No more fighting her in the trenches. Cassandra's entire strategy relied on my volatility. If I simply removed my reactions, her schemes would have nowhere to land. I was going to let her overplay her hand. I was going to let her ruin her own flawless reputation, and I wasn't going to lift a single finger in anger to do it. The following afternoon, exactly as it had happened before, a maid delivered a garment bag to my room. Inside was the dress. It was a monstrosity of cheap, scratchy tulle and overly shiny synthetic silk designed to vaguely resemble an exclusive Marchesa gown. Up close, the stitching was crooked, and a few of the sequins were already loose in the bag. It was insulting. Instead of storming down the hall to demand answers, I calmly walked into my ensuite bathroom. I took a pair of small grooming scissors and subtly snipped the zipper track right near the base, rendering it completely broken. Then I pulled out a vintage midnight blue velvet Dior gown that had belonged to my late mother. It was elegant, understated, and undeniably authentic. When I floated down the grand staircase an hour later, my father, Cassandra, and Bianca were waiting in the foyer. Bianca looked like a glittering chandelier in a stunning, genuine Oscar de la Renta piece that probably cost more than a luxury sedan. When Cassandra turned and saw me in the dark blue Dior, her face froze. "Rachel," Cassandra said, her voice tight, masking her irritation. "Darling, what happened to the dress I had made for you? I was so looking forward to seeing you in it." I widened my eyes, letting a look of profound, apologetic sadness wash over my features. "Oh, Cassandra, I am so devastated." I went to zip it up and the zipper entirely split off the track. It just completely unraveled. I didn't want to make us late by trying to have the staff fix it, so I just threw on one of Mum's old dresses. "I'm so sorry. I hope you aren't disappointed in me." My father Robert stepped forward, adjusting his bow tie. "Nonsense, Rachel. You look beautiful. Your mother loved that dress. And Cassandra, honey, don't worry about the broken one. You know how these modern tailors are cutting corners these days." Cassandra's jaw ticked, but she forced a radiant smile. "Of course, Robert, you're right. She looks lovely." Bianca glared at me, without the ugly polyester dress to make her look superior. By comparison, her overly flashy gown suddenly looked a bit desperate next to my classic vintage silhouette. Strike one, I thought, slipping into the back of the waiting limousine. The St. Jude's Autumn Gala was held in the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel in Manhattan. The room was a sea of crystal chandeliers, towering floral arrangements of white orchids, and the absolute wealthiest people on the eastern seaboard. Almost immediately after we arrived, Tristan found us. My fiancé. Seeing his face, handsome, aristocratic, with that signature smoldering gaze, sent a wave of physical nausea through my stomach. I remembered the exact sound of his laughter in my hospital room. "Rachel, you look breathtaking," Tristan murmured, stepping in to kiss my cheek. In my past life, I had clung to him all night, seeking validation and protection from Cassandra's subtle jabs. This time, I offered him a polite, entirely platonic smile and took half a step back. "Thank you, Tristan," I said mildly. "Actually, would you mind keeping Bianca company for a bit? It's so crowded in here, and I know she gets overwhelmed. I need to go speak with Mrs. Genevieve Dubois about the charity auction." Before he or Bianca could protest, I slipped away into the crowd. I didn't go far. I stood near a towering ice sculpture, sipping sparkling water, and watched them. Left entirely to their own devices, Tristan and Bianca naturally drifted toward each other. Within 20 minutes they were standing far too close, Tristan's hand lingering on the small of Bianca's back, whispering in her ear, while she giggled playfully. They thought they were being discreet, but in high society, there are no secrets. I saw Arthur Pendleton, a notorious gossip and board member of my father's company, arch an eyebrow as he watched the two of them. I saw other wealthy matrons leaning in, whispering behind their champagne flutes. I was supposed to be the jealous, crazy fiancé who drove Tristan away. By entirely removing myself, I just made them look like a pair of shameless, brazen cheaters. But the real event of the night was yet to come. Around 10 o'clock, the silent auction concluded. This was when Cassandra's main trap was supposed to spring. Earlier in the evening, a priceless Van Cleef & Arpels diamond brooch had been placed on display in a glass case in the VIP lounge. In my previous life, Cassandra had slipped it out during a momentary lapse in security, walked past me in the crowd, and discreetly dropped it into my silver clutch. When the theft was discovered, she had helpfully suggested a bag search for everyone in the room, claiming she wanted to clear the family's name immediately. I had been caught red-handed. I kept a hawk's eye on Cassandra as she mingled near the VIP lounge. I saw her slip inside. Earlier in the evening, I had noticed that Bianca and I were carrying identical silver Judith Lieber, clutches a coincidence orchestrated by Cassandra to make us look like loving sisters. As Cassandra exited the VIP lounge, her eyes scanning the crowd for me, I quickly walked over to the table where Bianca had abandoned her clutch to go dance with Tristan. I placed my identical bag right next to hers, slid hers an inch to the left, and stepped behind a heavy velvet curtain near the terrace doors. From my vantage point, I watched Cassandra glide toward the table. She saw the silver clutch, gave a quick glance around to ensure no one was watching her hands, and expertly popped the clasp, dropping a heavy glittering object inside before snapping it shut. She turned and walked away, a triumphant, satisfied smile playing on her lips. She had dropped it into Bianca's bag, completely unaware of the swap. 15 minutes later, the music suddenly cut off. A frantic event organizer stepped up to the microphone, her face pale. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am so sorry to interrupt the evening. It appears there has been a misunderstanding. A highly valuable item from the VIP display is missing. Security has asked that no one leave the ballroom until the issue is resolved." A loud murmur of shock rippled through the elite crowd. My father looked deeply annoyed. Cassandra immediately placed a dramatic trembling hand over her heart, stepping into the center of the room to make sure everyone was looking at her. "This is an absolute outrage," Cassandra announced loudly, her voice carrying over the murmurs. "To think someone would steal from a children's charity. We must all cooperate to clear this up immediately. In fact, to show our absolute transparency, my family will volunteer to have our belongings searched first. Robert, Rachel, Bianca, bring your bags to security." I stepped out from behind the curtain, my face a perfect mask of calm confusion. I picked up my clutch from the table, leaving Bianca's exactly where it was. "Of course, Cassandra," I said, my voice clear and ringing. "Anything to help." I handed my bag to the stern-faced head of security. He popped it open, shined a flashlight inside, and handed it back. "Clear," he grunted. Cassandra's eyes widened. She stared at my bag, then stared at me, the color rapidly draining from her perfectly contoured face. Bianca, annoyed by the interruption to her evening with my fiancé, huffed loudly, marching over to the table and grabbing her silver clutch. "This is so embarrassing, Mum. Do we really have to do this?" she whined, shoving her bag at the security guard. The guard opened Bianca's bag. He paused. He reached 2 fingers inside and slowly pulled out a blindingly bright diamond brooch. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet. "Well, well," the security guard said, his voice carrying like a gunshot in the quiet room. "I think we've found it." I looked at Cassandra. She looked like she had just been struck by lightning, and I stood there utterly serene, watching the first match drop on the empire she had built. The silence in the Pierre Hotel ballroom was so heavy, it felt suffocating. Hundreds of the wealthiest, most influential people in New York City were staring in unblinking disbelief at my stepsister. Bianca stood, paralyzed, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish, while the blindingly bright Van Cleef & Arpels diamond brooch dangled from the security guard's gloved fingers. I didn't," Bianca finally shrieked, her voice shattering the quiet. Her perfectly manicured hands flew to her face. "I don't know how that got in there. I swear." My father, Robert Kensington, turned a shade of deep, mottled crimson. For a man who sat on the board of 3 Fortune 500 companies and prized his public image above all else, this was the ultimate nightmare. He marched over, snatching the brooch from the guard and handing it back to the event organizer with a terse, humiliating apology. Cassandra, realizing her masterful trap had somehow swallowed her own daughter, panicked. The polished, unbothered veneer she had maintained for years cracked right down the middle. "Robert, wait. This is a setup," Cassandra cried out, her voice entirely too shrill. She pointed a shaking accusatory finger directly at me. "Rachel did this. She must have. They have the exact same Judith Lieber clutch. Rachel stole it and slipped it into Bianca's bag to frame her." In my past life, I would have exploded. I would have screamed, cursed, and defended myself with violent, tearful indignation, which would have only made me look like the unstable, guilty culprit Cassandra was painting me to be. This time I took a small step back, widening my eyes in horror. I let my shoulders slump, forcing a single perfect tear to spill over my lashes. "Cassandra, how could you say that?" I whispered. My voice was quiet, but in the dead silence of the ballroom, it carried. I've been standing near the terrace for the last hour talking to Mrs. Dubois about the charity auction. I even handed my bag to security first, to prove we had nothing to hide. Why on earth would I sabotage my own sister at a children's charity gala? Mrs. Genevieve Dubois, a formidable matriarch of Manhattan high society, immediately stepped forward, nodding firmly. The poor girl is telling the truth, Cassandra. Rachel was with me. I watched you and Bianca hovering around the VIP lounge all evening. The murmurs swelled into a roar. Cassandra realized she had overplayed her hand, attempting to throw me under the bus in front of the very people who had watched me stand quietly in the corner. My father grabbed Cassandra by the elbow, his grip tight enough to make her wince. "Not another word!" He hissed, his eyes blazing with a fury I had never seen directed at her before. "You are embarrassing me. We are leaving. Now." The next morning, the scandal broke on page 6. The headline read, "Sticky Fingers in High Society. Kensington heiress caught red-handed." Bianca became an instant social pariah. But I knew Cassandra wouldn't just accept defeat. A wounded animal is the most dangerous kind, and she was desperate to regain control. In my previous life, a month after the gala, Cassandra had convinced my father that I was mentally unstable. She had forged my signature to transfer my maternal trust fund, a staggering $60 million, into a holding company she controlled, claiming it was for my own protection. Then she framed me for embezzling funds from my father's real estate firm, ensuring I was cast out completely penniless. I wasn't going to wait for the knife in the back. I was going to hand her a defective blade. 2 days after the gala, I took a private car to the towering Manhattan offices of Skadden Arps, Slate, Mega and Flom. I sat down with Harrison Caldwell, the senior partner who had managed my late mother's estate. "Harrison," I said softly, sipping the espresso his assistant had provided. "I have reason to believe my stepmother is going to attempt to access the trust my mother left me. I want to invoke the contingency clause." Harrison, a sharp-eyed man in a tailored Tom Ford suit, leaned forward, intertwining his fingers. "The PwC audit protocol. Rachel, if we lock the trust, it means not a single cent can be moved even by you without a full forensic financial audit by PricewaterhouseCoopers and a biometric signature verification. It's a very aggressive, very loud security measure." "I know." I smiled, a genuine cold smile. "I want it locked, but more importantly, I don't want anyone to know it's locked until they try to open it." "Consider it done," he replied. With the financial trap set, I returned to the Kensington estate and played the perfect sympathetic victim. I brought Bianca tea while she sobbed in her room over her cancelled country club memberships. I told Tristan, my supposed fiancé, that I was just so overwhelmed with the family drama that I needed some space, practically pushing him right back into Bianca's waiting, desperate arms. Cassandra, meanwhile, was unraveling. The legal fees and PR firms she was secretly hiring to clean up Bianca's image were draining her personal accounts. Just as I predicted, she got greedy. She needed capital, and she needed it fast. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, I watched from the upper landing as Cassandra slipped into my father's private study, carrying a leather folio. She was going to execute the fake transfer documents. In my past life, this was the moment my fate was sealed. Now it was hers. The explosive climax of Cassandra's meticulously built empire didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened exactly 2 weeks later, during a formal dinner party at the Kensington estate. My father had invited Tristan's parents, the immensely wealthy Montgomery family, to discuss the upcoming merger between our family's real estate empires. It was supposed to be a night of reconciliation, a way to prove that the Kensington family was still stable, despite Bianca's little misunderstanding at the gala. We were seated in the formal dining room, beneath a sparkling baccarat chandelier. The staff was pouring a 2010 Chateau Margaux when the heavy mahogany doors of the dining room swung open. Our ancient butler, Thomas, looked deeply uncomfortable. "Sir, I apologize for the interruption, but there are some gentlemen here who insist it is a matter of urgent legal importance." Before my father could object, Harrison Caldwell strode into the room, flanked by two serious-looking men carrying heavy briefcases. "Robert, forgive the intrusion," Harrison said, his voice carrying the icy authority of a man who billed $2,000 an hour. "But as the executor of the late Mrs. Kensington's estate, I had a legal obligation to inform you immediately of a severe breach in protocol." My father stood up, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin, glancing nervously at Tristan's parents. "Harrison, what on earth is going on?" "We are in the middle of dinner." "Yesterday morning," Harrison announced, looking directly at Cassandra, whose face had just drained of all human color, "someone submitted a signed authorization to Skadden Arps, attempting to wire $60 million from Rachel's maternal trust into a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands." The silence in the room was deafening. My father looked at me bewildered. "Rachel, did you authorize this?" I looked up, my eyes wide and entirely innocent. "No, Dad. I haven't signed a single financial document in months." "We know she didn't," Harrison continued smoothly, "because Mrs. Kensington had the foresight to include a contingency clause. The signature on these transfer documents is a highly sophisticated forgery. The biometric security check flagged it immediately, which automatically triggered a forensic audit by PricewaterhouseCoopers, and the IP address used to submit the forged documents came directly from the computer in your private study, Robert." My father slowly turned his head to look at Cassandra. Cassandra was trembling violently, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the dining table. Robert, it's a mistake. Our system must have been hacked. I would never." "The Shell Corporation in the Cayman Islands," Harrison interrupted, tossing a thick dossier onto the center of the dining table, "is registered under the maiden name of Cassandra Vance. The audit also revealed that over the past 3 years, Cassandra has systematically siphoned $2.4 million from Kensington Holdings Charitable Foundation to pay for Bianca's personal expenses." "You..." My father's voice was a barely audible, dangerous rasp. He looked at his wife as if he were looking at a venomous snake that had been sleeping in his bed. "You tried to steal my daughter's inheritance. You stole from my company." "It's a lie!" Bianca suddenly shrieked, standing up so fast, her chair tipped backward onto the Persian rug. "Rachel is making all of this up. She's jealous. She's always been jealous of me and Tristan." Ah, the final piece of the puzzle. I had almost forgotten. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. With 2 taps, I connected it to the massive smart TV mounted on the wall of the adjacent parlor, perfectly visible from the dining table. "Jealous?" I asked, softly tilting my head. "Why would I be jealous, Bianca?" I pressed play. The screen flickered to life, showing crystal clear, high-definition security footage from our estate's pool house, dated just 3 days ago. On the screen, Tristan and Bianca were violently making out against the bar, discarding their clothes before disappearing onto the velvet sofa. The audio was unmistakable. Tristan's mother, Mrs. Montgomery, let out a horrified gasp, covering her mouth. Tristan turned ghost white, looking at me with absolute terror. "Rachel, wait, I can explain." "Save it, Tristan," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I looked at Mr. Montgomery, who was already out of his chair, his face tight with disgust. Robert, Mr. Montgomery said, his voice frigid. The merger is off. And Tristan, if you are not out of this house in 30 seconds, I will personally see to it that you are cut out of the Montgomery Trust by morning. Tristan didn't even look back at Bianca. He practically sprinted out of the room, desperate to save his own skin. My father stood at the head of the table, a man completely broken by the realization of his own foolishness. He looked at the forged documents, then at the frozen image of his stepdaughter and his future son-in-law on the screen, and finally at Cassandra, who was now weeping hysterically, begging for forgiveness. "Get out," my father whispered, and then he roared the sound, shaking the crystal in the chandelier. "Get out of my house, both of you. Thomas, call the police and have them escorted off the property. Then call my divorce attorney." I didn't say a word. I didn't gloat. I didn't scream. I didn't throw a single thing. I simply sat back in my velvet chair, picked up my crystal flute of vintage champagne, and took a slow, deeply satisfying sip. I watched as the police arrived, their red and blue lights flashing through the bay windows, casting frantic shadows against the French blue walls. I watched Cassandra stripped of her dignity, her jewels and her flawless reputation, being escorted into the back of a squad car in handcuffs for wire fraud. I watched Bianca sobbing on the driveway in her designer heels, clutching a single Louis Vuitton bag, completely abandoned by the man she thought she had stolen from me. They had tried to bury me in the dark. They just didn't realize I was the one controlling the dirt. And that is how you serve revenge on a silver platter, letting the trash take itself out. Rachel's calculated, ice-cold takedown of her wicked stepmother proves that sometimes silence is the deadliest weapon of all. Did you love seeing Cassandra and Bianca's empire crumble to absolute dust? If this story had you hooked until the very last second, make sure to smash that like button, share this video with your fellow drama lovers, and subscribe for more insane revenge stories.